Hi, this is Nicole Sodoma. Welcome to our second episode of The Space Between. Today, I'm so excited to be here with Penelope Hefner. We call her Penny Hefner. Penny and I have been practicing together a long time. I met Penny before she had any children, and now she has got 4 young boys. And she is just a joy to work with, and I can't wait to tell you about all of her expertise in the area that we're going to be talking about today, which is we're going to be talking about parenting schedules, custody trends, and we're going to give you some practical tips. If you need to create a schedule, modify a schedule, it's just going to be about custody orders and all the things that we want to make sure you know. I want to remind you that the reason that we call the podcast The Space Between is because there is this space between the time you separate and the time that you actually get divorced that can be really overwhelming. And it is our hope that the things that you learn on this podcast, the things that we can teach you in all of our work, help you get through that process, that time that we call the fog. So let's get started with The Space Between. Hi, Penny.
Hi, Nicole.
Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Penny, tell our listeners a little bit about your background. So I know you went to Chapel Hill.
I did. I went to Chapel Hill for undergrad and for law school, so I'm a big Tar Heel. And I originally didn't think I would do family law, but my loved ones, including my mom, told me it would be a good fit for me because of my passion for kids and all things kid related. So I did end up going down that path, and I've been practicing family law for 17 years.
What would you have done if you'd not done family law?
I thought I was going to be this big powerhouse corporate attorney, that I was going to be helping with mergers and acquisitions, these exciting things. And it turns out that real life and families is far more exciting than that.
Family law is pretty exciting.
Yes.
Yes, there are no 2 days alike for sure. Why did you want to talk about parenting schedules and all things related to parenting schedules today?
So I think for 2 reasons. First, it's where I see the most assumptions being made, people really digging in on certain points and maybe not necessarily needing to, but there just seems to be this education gap in what, we throw the terms out, parenting schedule, but people don't know what that actually means, or they think you just look at a calendar and throw some dates out there, but there's a lot more to it. And then I think secondly, it would just save people a lot of time and heartache to know where the trends are going and how things have changed over the years, because in all states pretty much there's been these shifts over time where you started, decades ago with moms primarily getting custody to a much greater shift towards the middle.
And so would you say that working with parents in these working through these parenting schedules is one of your favorite parts of your role as a family law attorney?
It is. I think it makes the most difference in people's lives. The money is certainly important. I'm not discounting that, but when it comes to your children, I think every single client says that's their priority. So knowing how important it is, and then just knowing the experience that I and other attorneys like me bring to it that say, hey, we did this in one case, you might want to consider it here, because people don't know what they don't know.
Okay, so family law attorney, check, 17 years. Okay, I know that you do other things in family law. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I am a guardian ad litem, which means I am a best interest attorney for children. So if mom and dad are going through, or parent A and parent B are going through a situation and they either completely don't agree or there's some special need there, a lot of times the court will appoint a guardian ad litem to represent the best interests of the children. So I like to do that type of work. That is very much in the role of almost like an investigator. You want to get to the bottom of what's going on and then make a recommendation to the court. But where I spent about...
Wait, who appoints guardian ad litems in that scenario that you just described?
So the parents can either agree and it'll be part of a court order, or a judge will do it. And that's the case in North Carolina and in many other states as well.
Okay. All right. So guardian ad litem. And then what else?
I'm a mediator, so I will mediate cases. And there again, I think just by natural, just my interest and where my skills lie, I do a lot of custody mediations, just more so than even the financial ones. And then I think the area that brings me the most experience and insight is serving as a parenting coordinator. So that is something that I'm a North Carolina parenting coordinator, but many states across the country have a parenting coordinator. We call them PC for short. And PCs are like a referee. So they call the balls and strikes when parents can't agree. We like to help people come to a decision together, but if you can't, that PC often serves as the tiebreaker, and that just keeps things moving because life goes on, and you can't often wait for that magic moment where you get your court date.
So, I mean, I know that, like, I'm a PC, and I would say, and in fact, I think that we have the most PCs across all of our offices than probably in any other law firm in the state, for sure.
Yeah.
And I always say when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I want to be a PC," I say that is, to me, one of the very hardest jobs. It's harder than being a lawyer.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. When you're an attorney, you pick a side, right? Like your client comes to you, you find all the strengths in your case, the weaknesses, and you work around that. But when you're the parenting coordinator, it is somewhat like being a judge. You don't have that total power, but you have to be neutral. We're human beings. You have that moment where you might really feel a little more of a connection with one parent over the other, but you have to ignore that, and you have to focus on the kids. You've got to walk that tightrope. You've got to keep in mind the law, but you can't give legal advice. So it's a really tough role to be in.
I mean, I was thinking, like, what's the craziest thing that I've done as a PC? Like, I remember, maybe it's not crazy, I don't know. I'm trying to think, can you think of the craziest thing you've done as a PC?
Oh my goodness. I mean,
I've gone to exchanges, I've and witnessed behaviors, and I think the hardest part really was like what you just said. Sometimes you may feel connected to one parent over the other, but it's not a connection like in your everyday sense. It's
Right.
more like
it's like parenting style. You may parent the same way that they do. You may understand where they're coming from. Maybe they're a working mom like we're working moms. So it's not necessarily about liking someone better than the other. It might be that there's just, again, the word affinity, but you have to put it aside and you have to look at it. So there are times when we were dealing with everything with the pandemic. As the PC, I can't tell you the number of times we had to navigate and figure out whether kids would be vaccinated or not. And I couldn't look at it like, what would I do? Or did I vaccinate or not vaccinate my children? I had to look at it like both of these parents want to do what's best for their kids. They fundamentally disagree. How do we get past it?
Right.
So we did lots of different things. I mean, I had one where I spoke to, I think, 5 different pediatricians. They provided names, I called them, and I went with the majority, right? Like the majority of the pediatricians were saying X, so we did that. In another one, we went back and forth, and finally one of the parents said, okay, I'm going to agree, but I don't want to do any of the boosters until we talk about it further. So there were various outcomes, but it was a really tricky thing. It's not something that you get trained for as a PC. How are you going to deal with it if there's a pandemic and people don't agree?
Well, yeah, and then you have to rely on, the first piece of that is you have to figure out what the custody order or the custody agreement says.
Right.
And then go from there, because usually when the PCs get appointed, it's because there's some gap, in the order, or there's a decision that can't be made or isn't being made, and you don't want to end up in the courtroom, and in the courtroom it's going to take 3 or 4 months to get to the courtroom anyway, depending on which county you're in. So I love the work of a parenting coordinator, but holy moly, it is like, I think it's way harder than advocating for one parent.
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about parenting schedules in general, and I think the easiest way for us to start doing that is first, like what I have been using the terms parenting schedule for most of my career, but really what we're talking about is physical custody, right?
We're talking about physical custody. People will call it parenting schedule, physical custody, custody schedule, visitation. And I normally tell, clients, you can call it schedule A, B, blue, green. It doesn't really matter. The point is where the kids are, how they are spending their physical time.
And I feel like, I always say, like, where they put their heads on their pillow at night.
Right.
Because sometimes people want to go, oh, it's a parenting schedule, but they come home after school, they do their homework with me, and then they go to the other parent's house.
Right.
Well, technically, that's not a parenting schedule because it's where they put their heads on their pillows at night, even though that doesn't necessarily seem fair to me.
Right.
But anyway, okay, so what is the difference? I'm going to ask you some questions that are just really basic because I feel like when we talk about physical custody and parenting schedules, that doesn't address the vaccine question. That doesn't
That's
address
right.
the legal custody side. But I think most of the time when you have a parent who says, hey, I want custody, what they're talking about is probably one or the other. Don't you feel like that's the case?
They're wanting, yeah, it can be, they may be saying they want the final say on things, which would speak to more legal custody.
Which would be like the vaccine question, like
Correct.
medical decisions.
Yep, where they go to school, all those kinds of things. But the physical custody, when they say I want custody, they really want their house to be the home, to be home base, where the child or children spend most of their time. If we're talking about what school district they're in, they want to be home base. They want to be home base. And sometimes they don't know the vocabulary to use, and they'll say, I want sole custody, or I want custody. And my question back is always, so they can't spend any time with the other parent? And they're like, no, that's not what I mean. So that's where you got to make sure, like if you're a parent and you're not sure, that you're asking your attorney, instead of going in kind of with, this is what I want, asking what the options are, because you could spend time you don't need to going down the wrong path entirely.
Okay, so what do you think makes for a really well-written parenting schedule?
I think there are two things that people should do that will help more than they can imagine. So the first one is actually looking at the calendar. And that seems silly. But what people will do is they'll draw a grid, okay, or they'll put it into an app and they'll say, I want this 70-30 split of custody, or 60-40, or whatever percentages, or I want to have Mondays and Tuesdays and they can have Wednesday and Thursday, but nobody puts it on the calendar. And then when you put it on the calendar, you all of a sudden start to see things like, oh, if I have Thanksgiving, that could mean I have 3 weekends in a row. There's only 4 in November. I may not see my kids, but for a handful of days that month. So putting it on the calendar, comparing it to the school calendar, or whatever you decide to be the determining factor for the holidays, that you look at all of that and you make sure it makes sense in real practical terms. Same thing for summer. People will say, let's divide the summer, but they don't define when it starts and when it stops. So actually looking at the calendar is one huge thing, and making sure that whatever you're thinking of doing actually fits with the lives of your children and the schedule they follow.
I feel like I've got so many horror stories on this. Like even my own parenting schedule got all jacked up because the school changed when the holiday was.
Yep.
And you can't like run back to court and go, oh, guess what? Our exchange date was supposed to be when school recessed, but instead school's now recessing 5 days early.
Right.
And now the schedule's all lopsided, and now I feel like I am a walking example, even though.
And you knew better.
And I knew better. But
I mean, you've done it before, but when you're sitting there, you don't know, and you're only thinking, I want to be done with this. I want to come to an agreement. I want what's fair. That's what most people are thinking. But that's what I mean about you got to put it on the calendar.
Well, and you hope that the other parent is going to recognize that they're going to be in the same situation the following year.
Right.
And that they're going to be able to work with you. And you cannot assume, I think this is one of the hardest lessons, right? You cannot assume flexibility of the other parent. You always have to assume that, and I hate that because I think that flexibility is necessary for children. But I mean, a schedule, yes, but you have to be able to move around, for example, when school changes things. But like also, knowing like this is the backbone, you can put whatever you want into an agreement. But if there's an opportunity to change it, you always can agree to those changes so long as both of you agree, right?
So even if it's backwards, and I agree with you that it is,
right.
It's like you can't trust at the outset, and then so long as things go smoothly for a period of time, then people get a little more flexible, but you can't start with flexibility.
So when do you think the best time is for parents to start thinking about a parenting schedule?
Immediately, I would
say.
Like
before separation?
Even before separation. I think that they have the best chance at maybe figuring it out with the other parent. If they're still in the same home and both of them are seeing what life is like, you can kind of set the right tone. I tell people you can't unring that bell. So if parent A says to parent B, I think we can do some type of 50-50 split, and parent B goes, yeah, that's probably okay. And then parent B goes and speaks with their attorney and they realize, well, this is what that would mean. That would mean summers, holidays, all during the school year. Going back to parent A and saying, oh, I was thinking more it would be some different split. Well, all parent A heard was 50-50 sounds good. So the earlier the better. So I was saying, so one thing is putting it out on the schedule and then putting it out on a calendar. And then I think the second big thing that people can and should do is think creatively. about how you can address your concerns with the other parent without changing the schedule all that much. Meaning, people are like, I'm worried about that other parent's drinking. I'm worried about how they spend their time with the children. They're not helping them with homework. I had one where, he won't ever have them wear seat belts. Like, whatever the issue is, people think that they can account for that by changing the physical parenting schedule, by minimizing that other parent's time. And really, I tell people, if it can happen in 1 hour, it can happen in 2 hours or 10 hours. Like, that's not really what it's about. If you've got concerns, find ways to address those concerns more than the schedule.
That's such good advice. Because, there's just no way to stop those.
Yes.
There's just no way. Even in an abusive situation, you can't change who that parent is. And I think I said this in our last episode, like, the idea that you're not happy in your marriage or that you don't like the way someone parents, and then you're like, I want a better life for myself and for our children. And so you split, and then do you think that person's going to be nicer or a better parent or disciplined differently? Like, probably not.
No.
So, like, I love the idea of saying, okay, just work out the parenting schedule. I want you to tell me all the things that you would like to see addressed, but that doesn't necessarily change the parenting schedule.
And one more than that, Nicole, is to use it to your, when I say your advantage, I don't mean as the parent, but even for your children, use that to your advantage by saying, okay, parent B, I see that you really want 50-50 custody. In order for me to feel comfortable with that, here's what I would want to see. Sure. I want a provision that both of us are going to work on homework, that it should be completed the day that it's assigned, or whatever you come up with. I want a provision that we're not going to drink to excess when we have the children in our care.
That
so
should
set
be
it
easy
up.
Enough to put in there, but
right, but not always.
Right.
So my point is, use it in that way and say, these are my concerns. I'm willing to meet you in the middle, for lack of a better phrase, but this is what I need to see first. And people are far more receptive to that than things like, you can't have 50-50 custody because I don't trust you.
No, you aren't in our office right now, but there are so many police officers and ambulances. I'm dying to know what's happening. I'm going to try not to look at my phone. Okay, so, all right, anyway, so tell me the difference. Okay, so we're talking about parenting schedules, and I love that advice. And now tell me that, just because it's not always clear, regular versus holiday versus special. What are the differences? Because I feel like people throw those terms around all the time, but they don't really know what it means.
Right. So the regular parenting schedule, that one pretty much everybody gets. That's like whatever you agree to, whether it is a week on, week off schedule or something where one parent has more of the school week and then you alternate weekends, long weekends, whatever it is on a regular basis. That's the regular parenting schedule. When you talk about holidays, that is really for you and your co-parent to determine, because obviously not everything is going to apply. We've got plenty of Jewish clients. They're like, I don't really need to deal with Christmas Day. I need to deal with Hanukkah. We've got other people, I'm Greek. They want to deal with the Greek holidays. Greek Easter doesn't always fall where American Easter. So you've got to be thinking about those things, and don't assume that the other parent is thinking those ways. They may have been a practicing Jewish person, and now they are no longer going to be doing that. So you've got to think through what the holidays mean for everybody. And then there's going to be special times too, and you want to talk about what does it look like if, that other parent gets remarried. Do your kids get to come to that wedding? Is that an extra time that's built in? Do you have extra bonus days throughout the year? Like, how do you want to handle things that are not holidays, but they're not really part of the regular parenting schedule?
Mine was, there is a week of the year that all of my kids connect with all of their cousins and aunts and uncles, and it was like so critical for me to make sure that they still had that connection with cousins. And I've seen that over the years with my clients too. Like, there's this one event that they go to, July 4th, an event every year, or they want to make sure that sometimes I've said, like, and I know it seems ridiculous, but make up a holiday and let it be the holiday that continues a tradition if you can't share that holiday.
Yeah.
But it's strange. I guess it's not strange, but not celebrating a child's birthday on their actual birthday. The reality is like, how often, I don't mean to downplay it, but like, how often do you actually have the child's birthday party on the day of the child's birthday? Like, you just don't, like, that actually ends up not being as important as the kid's birthday party.
Right.
The cupcakes at school, the party. So, like, you do have to start looking at it through a different lens. and remembering like by the time they're 16, they probably don't want to maybe not hang out with you anyway for a birthday party. And so what's this little window of time? Anyway.
So you create new traditions. That's the answer to that. You know what I mean? So like, you know, in my situation, my husband and I, you know, are together and we still don't get to always have all part of the birthday. It might be a school day. One of us is picking up from school. Somebody else is racing to go take a picture of the Spirit Rock or whatever thing, but we're not celebrating the birthday that night.
Right.
And so you come up with a new thing. Is it that, you know, I'm going to plan this epic birthday party? I encourage parents, if they really can't be in the same place at the same time, that they each do it, but they do it different. Maybe one does a family birthday and one does the friend birthday, and maybe they alternate going forward. You just have to figure out how you're going to do it, because the last thing that your child wants is for there to be a fight over how the birthday party is celebrated or how the birthday is celebrated.
Okay, so navigating, understanding, you know, putting all the schedule on the calendar, looking at it with that level of particularity, really important.
Yes.
Okay, so I've had judges tell me over and over, rights of first refusal, they absolutely hate. Why did anybody ever make them up? So, because this is one of those nuances, I think, that gets really important, and I have drafted them 25 different ways. They're never perfect, just like a custody order is never going to be perfect. So tell us what a right of first refusal is, and I want to know whether you like rights of first refusal.
So I'm going to start by answering your question of why did we ever do them? So we did them because clients very naturally and understandably feel like if our child or children can't be with me or can't be with the other parent, they should be with me, right? And no one's going to say that's a terrible idea, that doesn't make any sense. Reality sets in though, and you start to realize how problematic those provisions are. So I understand why people want them, but I very much have come over after 17 years to see it the way the judges see it, which they are a problem. And in fact, I had a case where all of the disagreement came up over that. So, you know, parent A felt very strongly about that right of first refusal provision. Parent B met someone else, they're now dating someone else, and they feel like if I'm gone for an hour to the grocery store, I think that my new person should be able to stay with the kids. We shouldn't have to get the kids uprooted, make them get in the car, or go to parent A's house and do all this back and forth. Did you say for an hour? Sometimes we do them for short weeks.
That's terrible. No, I mean, that would be terrible. That's like, the kids are with me.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on a date. I get asked on a date. I get
to the grocery store.
The grocery store. You literally would not be able to go to the grocery store in a movie or to the grocery store without having to call the other parent and say, hey, I'm leaving the kids by themselves for a little while. Or
by themselves,
they're with a neighbor.
They're with the neighbor.
If that's not age appropriate. And then you conceivably would have, okay, so lots of different variations of what a right of first refusal would look like.
Correct. So it could be.
You're insisting on including it in the order.
Right. So if it's in there, they're not all going to look uniform, but the general premise is if you can't be with the child, you have to ask the other parent. So where the problems come about is one, the length of time. So that's a big one because people are like, I can't even make it in the grocery store and back in an hour, and I'm going to uproot my kids just to go to the grocery store.
So it might not trigger. So you want to put in a trigger that if you're going to have the right of first refusal, there should be a trigger that is sufficient enough.
Correct.
Is it an hour? Is it 3 hours? Is it an overnight?
Most people that do them do the overnight because they feel like, okay, that's a solid chunk of time, and it implies that that parent really is not there. They're not in the city or they're not available for them to be gone overnight. So that's what people do. But then the other part of this that's problematic, in addition to what the trigger is going to be, is when the other parent feels that it has been triggered and you disagree. And they say, I wasn't gone all night. I came back at 2 a.m. Is that considered all night or is it not? Is it when it's 12:01 in the middle of the night or is it, the next morning? When does the period stop and start if you say an overnight? And what happens if the parents disagree whether it happened or not?
Oh, and when does a parent have to call the other parent to let them know that they're not going to be available?
Correct.
So if it's, you have to provide notice as soon as possible, and it's a short provision, you really are going to be scrambling. Like that's just not real life and not realistic at all.
And
really?
Then what if
Don't you think?
Yes.
I mean, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't have our kids with their parents. I'm not even say biological parents. We shouldn't have the children with their parents that they're supposed to be with at that time. But like, that is a lot.
It's
in
a
real
lot.
life.
And then
from
another
a logistics perspective. And is that good for the kids? Like the up and down, out of the house and
So it makes the kids feel like they're in the middle, because then they'll say, parent A will say, well, where was parent B? What time did parent B get home? Did you see parent B come in, or did you just see them that morning? And a lot of people do that. Another issue is, let's say it's all moving swimmingly. Let's say you come up with the right trigger and both people are super honest and transparent. But what happens if you are asking the other parent, you say, I'm going to be gone out of town, and then parent B doesn't let you know until the final minute? You can't just pick up and call nanny, babysitter, family member to come swoop in and fill that time.
Right.
So it really holds you back from being able to move forward and make plans. We're all assuming the other parent is going to say yes, but they may have a very legitimate reason why they can't do it either. It's not their parenting time, remember. It's not their scheduled time. And so then you're left with a scramble of, okay, parent B just told me they can't do it. Now what am I going to do? So all the way around, we keep seeing mistrust, frustration, scrambling. And so who really benefits from that? It's like you said, we want kids to be with their parents as much as possible.
Yeah.
But then there's the practical reality of it, and then putting kids in an even more difficult situation. So I don't think that the benefits outweigh the negatives.
The one thing that we didn't talk about, so we talked about, when they kick in, how much notice is provided.
Right.
But the third thing is who should be accepted out.
Yeah.
So, for example, if one of the parents is remarried, can the new step parent be the parent, if you will, while the parent that's supposed, can they be I don't know why I'm making that so complicated.
No,
but,
can they be the caregiver?
Yes.
Does it trigger the clause if you've got a step parent? People ask the same thing about when your child goes to spend the night at someone else's house. Does that trigger right of first refusal?
Right.
Your parents are in town visiting. They're the grandparents. You decide you want to use that opportunity for a date night. Or the grandparents say, get out. I want some time with my grandchildren. Does that trigger it? So there's a lot of things that you're not thinking about in that moment, because, again, at the outset, it makes total sense, but you don't realize all the pitfalls that come as a result.
Yeah, it can be really complicated.
And that's why judges hate it, Nicole, because they're like, now what do I do with this? This was supposed to make things better. It was supposed to make people feel more comfortable in their parenting schedule. And instead, we've got parents playing private investigator, tracking the other parent, filing motions for contempt because they violated it. It creates more conflict in most cases. And judges are like, the whole point was to reduce conflict.
Listen, as a parenting coordinator, as a family law attorney, and as a parent who experienced conflict in my own divorce, I have given the advice and have taken the advice of literally screenshotting where I am on my GPS at the time of an exchange, because I was so afraid that somebody was going to challenge me on a right of first refusal or on an exchange. It is, it's exactly why we call this podcast The Space Between, because there is this period of time that you're like, did I do it right?
Right.
Am I going to get in trouble? Because there is so much mistrust in the process, especially if it's high conflict.
Yes.
One of the things that is always that sticks with me is the fact that in our state, in the state of North Carolina, there is no prescribed parenting plan or custody order. I know that there are states that does exist.
Right.
In fact, they have statutes that talk about this is what the parenting schedule should be. But in our state, we don't have that. And one of the things that I do love is that every family has its own dynamics, and that it is not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about parenting schedules, when we're talking about physical custody, where they put their heads on their pillows at night, making sure that you've thought through some of those things, maybe some of the hardest stuff you have to deal with because it's emotional.
Right.
But it's an opportunity to really deep dive on what's important to you and what's going to work for the kids and what makes sense, because it's easy to think about the right now, but your lawyer, and I know you and I are big proponents of I am here for the now, but I really want to make sure that we're covering as much as we can for the tomorrow, for the next year, even though we know that children age, life changes, statistically you'll get remarried, but there are all these things that you can be thinking about. It's not going to be perfect, but every family's dynamic is different than everyone else's. And so making sure you're asking the right questions, thinking about some of these things, like you said, the earlier the better, I think makes a big difference.
And we're not saying don't do a right of first refusal, just know what could come as a result. If you and the other parent are like, this makes total sense to us and we're good with it and we understand the risks and we want to do it anyway, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But people go into it and thinking that's going to solve all the problems. That's going to ensure that everything goes smoothly, and that's just not the case.
And oh my gosh, time has changed so much because I think about, I used to see orders where it was, we'd be so appalled that someone wanted to put in a provision about tattoos, or haircuts, or piercings. Oh my gosh. Okay. Age and development considerations. So when we talk about parenting plans, we sort of do this big brush stroke,
right?
And we make a lot of assumptions. But the reality is like the age of the children matters.
It does.
And so, do you have? There used to be this therapist in town that had like her recommendations. The judges loved using her recommendations based on the age of the children. And I think a lot of it had to do with the attachment theory, but based on the age of the children, this was what she thought would be the best schedule. Do you have what you think is a best schedule depending on the age of the children?
So as a general rule, and people know, parents know their children and kind of what they can take and not take, but the younger the child, the more frequent the exchanges, and the older the child, the less frequent. So what you would do as a parenting schedule for a 2-year-old, and you're right, it does go back to the attachment theory, and you and I are not psychologists, psychiatrists, but from everything that we've learned and continuing education and all of that, is that they are forming their attachments. And even if you're not a mental health professional, you know from being a parent and working on these cases that when they're little, they don't have the concept of time. So saying, I'll see you next week, it's the first week of February, it doesn't mean anything to them. So having those more frequent, so we usually say like if they're 2 years old, don't go more than 2 days without seeing the other parent. As they get older, you can spread it out more. And then you reach a point where your teenager is like, I am not packing up my iPad, my Apple Watch, my books, everything that I've got, the clothes that I want to wear, the makeup that I want to wear. They are not going to want to pack that up every day or two. For them, it's easier to say, I'm going to go for a week. I know what that week looks like start to finish. And then an exchange is much smoother happening on one day as opposed to every few days.
I had a case forever ago, and the way, you're right. I mean, I think grown-ups think that kids have a better understanding of time than they really do.
Right.
And this little boy, the way that he knew that it was time to go to the other parents is his mom would trim his nails. And the trimming of the nails was like his cue, oh, I'm going to go see dad today. And I think that's like just so interesting and obvious, but it was a really good example to me that like, you're right, like kids they don't understand this concept of time.
But it's just like, well, I think that's a great example because just like when they're babies and everybody tells you like have the same routine at night, they're not going to sleep, right? No baby comes home from the hospital and they're like, I sleep 12 hours without, impossible, right? But they're like, start doing those trigger cues, the sleeping cues, like you're going to do bath, book, and bed, like whatever order you're going to do it in, because you're teaching your kids. And that's what you're doing with the custody schedule. You're teaching them what that rotation is going to look like. It's training like sleep training, potty training, anything else that you do. They have to learn it.
Okay, tell me, we talked about, when we were talking about having this podcast, we talked a little bit about modifying existing agreements or going or starting from scratch with custody agreements. And I want to say this, like when I use the word agreement, the idea is that it's something that both parties have agreed on, if it's a contract or if it's something that's signed off by the judge. And this is very specific to state.
Right.
So I'm just giving you like this, I'm saying it like it's also like a brush stroke, like a big broad stroke of a custody order versus a custody agreement. Mm-hmm. But in general, can you describe like what is your advice if you have an agreement in place? Let's just say it was an agreement that's been signed off by a judge. What do you look for if somebody wants to change that agreement or change the order?
Okay. So, like you said, it's going to be jurisdiction,
and I know
state
this
specific.
Is not legal advice.
It's going to be jurisdiction or state specific, but in general, what I tell people, I look at it more like as they're sitting there right now and they're signing and they say, but what if things change? And I say, okay, well, here's what you're looking for. if you're starting to see an impact to your child, that grades are dropping, that they're not, making and keeping those friends, that they really withdraw, that they are struggling in some way, or their mental health is affected. Okay, those would be all reasons that you would want to deeper dive and see what's going on. Is it the schedule? Is it their relationship with a parent? Is it the specific parenting provisions? They're too much, they're not enough. Maybe the right of first refusal is really stressing everyone out. It could be any number of things, but you're looking to see not just what you as the parent like or don't like. Right. And I remember you telling me about when I asked you about something about your situation and about going on a trip, and you said, it's not about me, it's about my kid. Well, that's what I say to parents. Like, you want all the time with your kid, right? Like, parents want that time. They don't like the idea of giving up time. But that can't be the driving factor here, because if you're not going to be together, you're going to have to split the time in some way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
So that can't be your driving, force. It has to be, what impact, if any, does it have on my child? And there needs to be some type of impact for, I believe, a judge in any state to really consider some type of modification, because these take a lot of time and effort. So it's not the case that a judge is going to say, sure, come back next week and we'll reassess. It usually takes months, if not years.
And I know, obviously there's a legal standard and there's case law that supports the ability to modify an order. But usually time alone is not the sole thing.
That's right.
And I remember, like, in 2008, when people were losing their jobs and the economy was tanking, and we were opening a law firm, right? That so much was changing. And I remember walking into the judge's chambers one day, and there was another lawyer there, and the judge was coming in to sign off on an order. And the judge said to me, I cannot believe how many people are losing their jobs and how many of relocation cases we have right now. Like, the court system was so overwhelmed with the number of cases where nothing had changed for the child, except that the child's parent has lost a job and needed to move.
Right.
For other employment. But the reality is, like, it triggers all these other things for happening. And so you do have to look at all of the circumstances as they were at the time you agreed to the order and as things are at the time that you want to change it.
Yeah.
So they can be really complex. They're not really that easy to modify. So, making sure there's some formula in there for what it would look like to the extent you can.
So we include, you're right. Relocation cases, every attorney, I think, every family law attorney kind of cringes, because we get it. We get why people would need to relocate. But we also get why the other person would be opposed. It's just going to be more cost and more logistics, so nobody really loves the idea.
Right.
But we tried to include a provision as to what happens if a parent needs to relocate. And that probably came about in large part because of what happened in 2008. Yeah. So people started thinking more, instead of we'll deal with it when it happens, let's put in a provision that if somebody has to relocate over X amount of miles, then you're going to go to mediation, or you're going to arbitrate it, or you're going to do, mediation, that they would go and they would talk it out with the use of a mediator.
They might find you.
They might find me to mediate, and we would assist with that.
Right.
If they can't do that or choose not to, of course they have the right to go to court. That's going to be true anywhere. But they can also arbitrate it, which is, essentially having a judge that you're paying for their time, and they're going to be an experienced, wise family law attorney, and they'll make the decision.
Yes.
So that's the hope, right? But you've got some choices there, but you can go ahead and foresee maybe that could happen. So let's go ahead and have a path forward on it. Another one that people don't think about is driving, when kids reach driving age. And that changes so many things. Everything from how they get from parent A to parent B. Are you going to let them drive? Are you guys going to buy a car together? Is one person going to insure it? Are they both going to insure it? So there's the financial piece, but it's also how it impacts, if it does, your custody schedule.
When they start to drive, like, there's so much pressure. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm going to shift this a little bit into what trends you see. I think we're doing pretty good on time. Mm-hmm. What trends you see over time, over your almost 20 years, what have you seen change when it comes to shared parenting, 50-50? I still hear moms walk in and say, Dad told me that even though he's never in town, he travels all the time, he's not even home for dinner, but he says he's going to have our kid 50% of the time. Is that true?
So you just summed it up right there. That's the toughest pill for people to swallow, is that the arrangement that you had prior is not the arrangement necessarily that's going to continue. And I get
But
why.
it might be.
It might
I
be.
mean,
That's
it
what I'm
might
saying.
be,
Not
yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But the assumption is that it will continue, and I get it, right? You're like, for the 10 years we were married, the 12 years, the 15,
Yeah.
you know, parent A stayed at home and parent B worked, and they figured out all the things, and it worked for both of them and for their children.
Yes.
And I heard a judge say one time, and I was like, well, that about sums it up. They said, just because parent B wasn't the primary caregiver doesn't mean they can't learn to be. Just like you, parent A, maybe didn't change the tire on your car, but you can certainly learn to do that. So it was a very blunt way of saying, just because it wasn't that way doesn't mean it can't be. And people need to know that a judge is not going to go into it. If you find yourself in front of a judge, which there are options not to be, but if you find yourself in front of a judge, that judge is going to look at it like, I'm going to look at best interests of this child, and I will look at past history, but that is not going to be the sole determining. So it's the sole determining factor. They're not going to say because parent B worked, they don't get to have equal parenting time. They're going to look at everything from how the child is doing, how they spend their time when they're with that parent, what opportunities that parent provides for them, what type of structure they provide or don't provide, a myriad of things that is not going to be solely how they did things before. And that's hard. If you signed up, so to speak, to be the primary caregiver and the stay-at-home parent, and then someone tells you maybe not, that's really hard.
Well, and I think too, like for the traveling parent, there's this, and I don't know, maybe you've experienced it differently, but like for the traveling parent, I would have to like tone down their expectations. They'd say, well, I'm traveling, I'll be stereotypical. I'm going to let her know when I'm traveling and she can have the kids when I'm traveling. Well, no, then she can't work full time. Like if you want her to work, you can't have it both ways.
You can't have both ways, right?
And so trying to figure out like how that looks is also very realistic. But you know, I always say like, really, what is it that you want? Like, what is it? What is the schedule? Let's just like, not what you want everybody to believe, not what you want yourself to believe, but like, what is actually going to work for your kids?
And it's a little bit of a leap of faith, Nicole. And I'm like, sometimes you just have to take a chance. So I had a client at mediation, and I just loved her for this because it was that stereotype of she stayed at home, he worked, he traveled. And then when they were in the space between, he would say, I'm going to be out of town, you take them, and she would kind of take them. And then sometimes because she was getting back into the workforce, she couldn't do it. So then she'd pay a sitter because it was technically his parenting time, but she had to cover. And then it was this like fight about reimbursement for the sitter and all of this.
Yeah, totally.
But ultimately, when we got to mediation, she decided, and I'm not recommending this for everyone, I'm just saying this is what she did. But she went in and she said, I'm going to shock him because he thinks that I want all the time and that it's going to be so easy. I'm going to go in and say I'm good with 50-50 and I'm going to see what happens. And I said, okay, this is your decision. You don't have to start there. We can negotiate. She was like, I'm good with it. She was at peace with it. She goes in, she says 50-50. By the end of the mediation, he was like, no thanks. And he ended up taking less time because when she started throwing in, but I'm not going to be your backup. We're not going to have a right of first refusal. I'm not your babysitter. I'm not going to arrange childcare for you. So that means this 50% of the year, you are going to have to take care of it, and I'll take care of my side of the street. And then all of a sudden, he starts looking at his work schedule and how many times he's going to need to do, make alternate plans, and things very quickly took a turn. So in that situation, she gambled and she won. Won't always be the case for people, but part of it is like sometimes you just have to put it out there and let people try. And I say the best that can happen is that other parent that you have little faith in rises to the challenge and does a great job, and your kids are the better for it.
Yes.
And if they don't, guess what? You're not going to just ignore it. You're going to do something about it. You're going to seek to modify or to do something about it if they can't. If they really can't do it, it will show itself.
Ambulance, more police cars and ambulances. What is happening in Charlotte today? I don't know. Okay, so let's talk about, we talk about the parenting schedules and the right of first refusal and all of the nuances and things that you want to know when you're comparing your calendar and trying to figure it out. What is your favorite tool for communication when you've got two parents who aren't great at communicating?
A parenting coordinator is my favorite tool. Here's
but if
why.
you can't afford a parenting coordinator,
if you can't afford
what is your favorite tool?
You can use Our Family Wizard. I think that's kind of the go-to for a lot of PCs and family law attorneys. It's a program where you can do everything from keeping track of expenses to monitoring and filtering emails, communications. You can keep a joint schedule. So there are lots
We have
of
no kickback from OFW at all. We have no relationship with our family wizard, but we do like the program.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that is one example of a program. There are plenty of different apps. Same thing. We don't have anything from any of these apps, but I have found that PC parents like to use Splitwise to keep track of expenses.
Okay.
People like to do, of course, a Google Calendar and do the color coding, like this is my time, your time, mutual time, where it's one of the kids' activities. So there are so many that didn't used to exist when people were doing like a paper calendar. So many options now. But the reason I said a PC, to the extent it's available, is because there's that human element. Because you've got all of these apps, and that can be very helpful, and sometimes that's the best you can do. But to the extent that you can get a human in there to say to you, you need to soften that, you keep triggering that person, rephrase, like so much of that is going to create better, longer lasting habits that people can use going forward.
What is your favorite tip to give a client for sending an email when, like, what is your favorite, let's just do that. What's your favorite tip for telling a client when they're in an email communication? Because I think that's how most people communicate.
So this is what I'm laughing,
And I've never had to be told this, ever. Wink, wink.
So I'm laughing because I say it all the time. So my PC clients know this, and if they're watching, they will know it. I always say delete the last sentence.
The last sentence is so good, though.
No,
it's so hard to delete. It sums up how you're feeling.
It's that last little jab, and you don't need it. Whatever you needed to say was said in the first few sentences, delete the last sentence. And it is without fail. I will look at it and I'll say, perfect email, delete the last sentence.
Okay, how often do you think communication should be in between parents? Do you think they should email, if it's high conflict, do you think it's once a week? Do you think it's twice a week? Is it the same day? Like, do you think, tell me more about what you give, practical advice, practical tips for high conflict custody cases.
So when they're my PC cases, I like to see when they're younger, it needs to be at least once a week, or as you do exchanges. And the reason all that matters is everything from they had a cold, I gave Tylenol at such and such a time. There are some things that child cannot or should not communicate to the other parent, so you're gonna need more frequent. I try and give like an outline, like it's gonna be health, education, social, whatever, fill in the blank. That should be more frequent. As they get older, you need it less and less because most people are communicating with their child by text or email or, by phone just as a natural part of their day because everybody is so plugged in. So I think there needs to be regular contact, but more frequent doesn't always mean better. Sometimes that just means more fodder for disagreement.
Oh, we've covered so much. Let me think. What would be like, what's 3 key takeaways that you want to end with today?
Okay. So one is pay attention to the calendar. I can't say that enough. So one takeaway is whatever parenting schedule you're thinking about, put it out on an actual 2025, 2026 and beyond calendar to see how it's actually going to work for you. The second thing is communicating, but deleting that last sentence, because what feels good in that moment may end up costing you hundreds or thousands of dollars in attorney's fees. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It will feel good for 30 seconds and then sting, and you'll feel the consequences of it for a really long time. And then I think the third takeaway would be when you're thinking through the parenting provisions, think through what really matters to you, not what your friend, neighbor, or sister or brother did, but what really matters to you. If drinking excessively is a concern, deal with that. If it's not, you don't have to throw in provisions just to throw them in. If your other parent has never been a drinker, you don't need to spend hours and tons of money figuring out perfect language for something that's not a problem. Focus on what your real concerns are, come up with creative ways to address those, and be open-minded as you go through the process because things are gonna come up. You said it several times during this podcast, like it's not gonna be perfect. Things will come up like the school changing its brakes, the child changing at school, a parent having to relocate. We can't anticipate for everything, but try and create those avenues through the parenting provisions where you can reach a resolution if something unexpected happens.
That is excellent. I love this real talk. This is real life, but it is so manageable. And if you've got the right advice and the right support system, you can do it. So thank you for being here today.
Yes.
I had such a good time with you.
Thank you.
Let us know if you have any other questions, and see you later.